Hello and welcome to the De Morgan Foundation's online lecture series. I'm Sarah Hardy, I'm the director of the De Morgan Foundation, and it's my pleasure today to welcome Naomi Gariff from Lakeland Arts. Naomi is the programme curator at Lakeland Arts, and within that remit has curatorial responsibility for Blackwell, the Arts and Crafts House, which she's going to talk to us about today. Naomi, thank you so much for joining us. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just share my screen, get up presentation. Can we all see that?
We can, yes.
Good. So hello, my name is Naomi Gariff and I am the programme curator at Lakeland Arts, and as Sarah said, I have the curatorial remit of Blackwell, the Arts and Crafts House. So Blackwell is a rare architectural gem, providing a perfectly preserved snapshot into the early 20th century living. The house is nestled at the heart of the English Lake District, with views overlooking Lake Windermere and the Coniston Fells beyond. Blackwell was designed by the noted arts and crafts architect Mackay Hugh Baillie Scott, and it is considered to be his seminal work. It's also the only Baillie Scott house to be permanently open to the public all year round, so it's quite a special building. As an architect, Baillie Scott strove to create beauty through harmony, and to design buildings that sat perfectly within their surroundings, that respected local vernacular, and that most importantly brought nature and the outside in. It was said of Baillie Scott that he loved nature, and next to nature, art. In this talk, I'll be taking you on a virtual tour of Blackwell, introducing you to Baillie Scott and showcasing how his approach to design created what many of our visitors say is one of the most beautiful houses that they've ever seen. So let me start by introducing you to the man himself. This is Mackay Hugh Baillie Scott, pictured here in his late 20s, looking quite dapper. He was born in Kent in 1865 and was the son of a wealthy Scottish landowner. He originally studied land management at the Royal Agricultural College in preparation for taking over his father's estates. But after graduating in 1885, he did what many children do, much to the disappointment of their parents, and went on to pursue something entirely different. He moved to Bath and began an apprenticeship to become an architect. His years at the Agricultural College would not go to waste, however, and in those years, Baillie Scott learned how to design functional agricultural buildings, and he also gained an intimate understanding of ecology, which he would instill into the over 300 buildings that he would go on to design. In 1884, Baillie Scott moved to the Isle of Man, where he would remain for 12 years, and these are some of the most important years in his practice. The story goes that he went there originally on a honeymoon, and he got so sick on the boat over that he couldn't possibly face coming back. And whilst this is a really, fun and amusing story, no doubt his decision was also influenced by the growing market for luxury holiday homes on the island, as by that time, hundreds of thousands of holidaymakers were flocking there every year. Whilst on the Isle of Man, Baillie Scott befriended Archibald Knox, who is perhaps best known for his designs at Liberty & Co. It was Knox that taught Baillie Scott to paint in watercolour, and the two worked together as art teachers at a local school. It was during this time as well that Baillie Scott began to affiliate himself with the arts and crafts movement. And I think the influence of Knox, particularly his Celtic knotwork, is visible in some of Baillie Scott's designs. It was also on the Isle of Man that he began to develop his unique architectural style, which included crisp lines, elongated wings to houses, and featuring multiple gables. He would also go on to incorporate elements of local vernacular and materials, which in itself would become a hallmark of his designs. In 1897, at the age of just 32, he received the commission which would really put him on the map, which was for the wealthy Manchester brewer, Sir Edward Holt. This commission was Blackwell. Blackwell was to be the Holt's holiday home, a rural retreat from the hustle and bustle of the industrial city. Its use as a holiday home enabled Baillie Scott to create a house whose entire function was to be a space of beauty, a space to dwell and to enjoy life. Here, Blackwell is pictured from its north elevation, seen from the lower garden terrace. The building comprises of two wings, the main body of the house with its three gables that you can see there, which contained the main family's living quarters, and also the east wing, which was home to a very generously sized servants' quarters. Baillie Scott firmly believed that servants also deserved spaces that were comfortable and suited to their purpose, and that actually had beauty to them, which at the time, sort of in the late 1800s, quite a radical idea. The smooth exterior of the building is cast in a white, rough cast concrete render, which is evocative of the Lakeland farmhouses that can be found in neighbouring fields. The roof is tiled in Westmoreland green slate, and it has chimney stacks that are topped by these quite unusual rounded pots. So that locally they're often referred to as top hat chimneys, and they are a local vernacular, rounded so as to provide strength and stability in the notoriously wet and windy Lakeland weather. The completely smooth walls of the building with inset stone mullions would become a signature of Baillie Scott, and yet despite its angular and modern forms, Blackwell somehow manages to sit perfectly within its surroundings as if moulded into the landscape. By taking elements of the local vernacular and really allowing them to sing, Baillie Scott creates beauty through harmony. Blackwell was approached from a long drive, which sadly is no longer in use, and actually now is our overflow car park. The clever placement of trees along this winding drive would shield the house, revealing it only at the last second. On the cast iron gates, which you can see on the right there, are the initials EH for Edward Holt. Straight ahead is the historic front entrance, through which the Holts would welcome guests into their home. Upon entering Blackwell, guests would quickly be ushered into one of the house's most impressive spaces, the main hall. Like many of his arts and crafts contemporaries, Baillie Scott looked to the past for inspiration. Blackwell's double-height main hall evokes the grandeur of a medieval baronial hall. Baillie Scott believed that this era of architecture, in which the house was designed around the large central space, was best suited for modern-day living. Here, families could gather, play, rest, and entertain. By the late Victorian era, the hall had become a passageway in most homes, a non-space used merely to get from one room to another. Baillie Scott advocated for the hall's revival and also for the implementation of something that at the time was fairly groundbreaking, and that is open plan living, by creating what he called rooms within a room. In Blackwell's main hall, we see this theory in practice. Behind the settle that you can see there is an inglenook fireplace, a room within a room, in which the family might retreat in an evening, or within which Mr. and Mrs. Holt might spend a quiet afternoon reading. Above it, this photo is slightly cropped, unfortunately, is a minstrel's gallery, a place where Mr. Holt could retire and smoke in the evening after dinner, or perhaps where the children could play during the day under the mindful ear of a nanny. On the opposite side of the room, beaten copper lampshades signal where a billiard table once stood. In many houses in this period, billiard tables would often be given a dedicated room, the billiards room, but here it is integrated into the whole. In many of his houses, Baillie Scott would incorporate sliding doors, walls, and curtains into the designs, which would allow families to create separate spaces as and when necessary. So within seconds, a cosy dining room could be created. The main hall also showcases another of Baillie Scott's approaches to architecture, which is unity of design. Baillie Scott believed that to create true beauty, a home must be designed in its entirety, taking every element into consideration, no matter how small. Colour palettes, materials, furniture, and furnishings should all be in harmony with one another and equally reflect the local landscape through the use of natural materials and motifs. Yeah, there we go. Throughout the main hall, a combination of new and reclaimed wood has also been used, specifically oak, and it's been perfectly toned and blended into one another. Here also is some of the most elaborate and beautiful carving within the house. winding its way around the room is this central Rowan frieze, which you can see on the right. And Rowan is a design which repeats itself around the house in various ways. Rowan was selected by the Holts to adorn their family crest. It is a plant that grows prolifically in the Lake District, and it also can grow abundantly under adverse conditions. In English folklore, it also holds meanings of protection, making it the perfect motif for this new family home. Upon the ceiling, ornamental beams create a crosshatch, with each join adorned with a uniquely carved ceiling rose, emphasising Baillie Scott's acute attention to detail. And you can see one of those on the left. Through a door in the panelling, we enter into the dining room. Immediately, we are welcomed into a much more cosy and intimate space as the ceiling drops to a single height. A sense of warmth is created through the use of textiles and stained glass. Westmoreland green slate is used again here in conjunction with Lancastrian stone to create a design for the fireplace. One of the things that I always find quite fascinating about this fireplace is how the design sort of leans a little bit towards Art Deco. And that's really interesting considering that Art Deco didn't really flourish, at least maybe in Britain, until maybe like 2 decades later. So it shows to me how Baillie Scott, especially with the ideas of open plan living, he always seems to be bucking a trend. Again, we see the same elaborate wood carving as in the hall, but this time it's concentrated on specific features, such as the end posts on the benches, or a structural stone, which you can just about see in the top left frame. Again, unfortunately, it seems to have cropped the photograph, annoyingly. But it is there. And such faith did Baillie Scott have in the beauty of natural materials that he would often make these structural elements in the house visible rather than hiding them away within the walls. In front of the fireplace is a chair titled the Artist's Chair. It was designed by Baillie Scott and made by Simpsons of Kendal, which is a local furniture making workshop run by Arthur Simpson. Simpsons of Kendal produced much of the finely carved panelling in Blackwell, and historic photographs of the house show us that this same design of a chair was placed in this position. And this is actually quite significant, as none of the furniture in Blackwell is indigenous to the house. Despite Baillie Scott's wish to design houses in their totality, the Holts chose to fill Blackwell with furniture of their own choosing, which, much to Baillie Scott's horror, included boar heads hanging in the hall and chintzy chairs sort of cluttering up the drawing room. Except from this chair, which photographs show us was present in the home. Maybe not this exact chair, but the same design of chair. I'm going to show you some of the historic photography that we have of the house now, as I think it's interesting to see, and it also illustrates the idea of creating beauty through harmony very well. These photographs are taken from Houses and Gardens, which was a book that Baillie Scott published in 1902, I think, which is the year after Blackwell was completed. Yeah. So this is the dining room historically as it was photographed in 1902. And it does look quite different. So you can still see the chair. So the chair is in the exact same place, in front of the fireplace, which we've tried to recreate. But if you look at the dining table, for instance, it's much more sort of Victorian in style. Something that I also thought was quite interesting is that the reclaimed, I didn't actually notice until putting this presentation together, is the reclaimed Delft tiles that we have in the dining room now don't appear to be in the fireplace on this picture. And I'm not sure if it's just because it's the light has sort of blown out the designs, but that's something that I'm going to be looking into later. And this is the hall, which I always feel like needs a bit of a jump scare warning because it does look so different. It's much more heavily decorated. As you can see, furniture choices are very different. They're not sort of arts and crafts furniture. And this doesn't allow the design of the room to sing. It almost overwhelms it. When Lakeland Arts took over the house in the late 90s, there were many discussions around how Blackwell should be presented when it opened to the public. And should it follow a National Trust example and present the house like this, which is more accurate to what it would have looked like when the Holts lived here? Or should it be decorated in the arts and crafts ethos as Baillie Scott would have wanted? And I think rather thankfully, they chose the latter. The collection at Blackwell is now comprised of arts and crafts furniture and objects from leading makers and designers in the movement, including a number of pieces by Baillie Scott himself. But back to the dining room. Here we see it from another angle, showcasing a lovely dining set by Ernest Jimson, and a close-up of a stained glass window, which sits to the left of the fireplace. In this more condensed space in the dining room, we can see Baillie Scott's use of natural motifs more clearly, as they can be seen on almost every surface of this room. Each set of stained glass windows in Blackwell features a unique design, which is often focused around a specific flower, and also has flying bluebirds, which are a common motif for Baillie Scott, but also for his contemporary Charles Boise. Bluebirds hold connotations of love, positivity, and renewal, and combined with motifs of flora and fauna, they are essentially a celebration of life and nature itself. The flower in this window is a peony, and really lovely when this picture was taken. You can see through the clear glass this beautiful wisteria climbing up Blackwell's south-facing wall. On the left, we can see one of the dining room's most striking features, which is this block print Hessian wall lining, which we're going to take a closer look at now. The Hessian wall lining is really rare. Though Baillie Scott included Hessian wall linings in a number of his buildings, this is the only surviving example, so it really is quite special. Hessian is an interesting material to select for such a grand house like Blackwell, as it was most commonly used for utilitarian purposes, potato sacks, for instance. But to Baillie Scott, there was no such thing as high and low natural materials. Each had their own beauty that only needed to be brought out through the design. The block printed surface features rowan, as well as daisies, harebells, and bluebirds. The plane of the Hessian was originally dyed the rich indigo colour, which you can just about make out some elements of it around the leaves if you look quite carefully. One of Baillie Scott's many interests was in the creation and study of natural dyes. He would often experiment with different dye pigments to see how they would fade over time. And it's interesting to me in this case that the dye pigment, the indigo that was used, has faded to an almost exact match of the tone of the woodwork below it, which often makes me wonder whether its selection was intentional. We head out of the dining room now and through the main hall into the entrance corridor that guests would have initially arrived into. Here we see another of Baillie Scott's clever design features, which is the use of space and light to create flow. At the end of the corridor, the dark woodwork gives way to a soft light glow, which beckons us towards Blackwell's perhaps most impressive room, which is the white drawing room. This room is very different to the rooms that we've been in before. Painted white from skirting to ceiling, the room creates a feeling of peace and tranquility. The soul is lifted, and many of our visitors describe this room as an almost religious experience. Today, to paint a room completely white is the norm, but in 1901, when Blackwell was completed, it really, was quite a radical idea. The room features elaborate carving and design details, including a gesso frieze and ceiling, which we'll take a closer look at in a second. But yet, despite this heavy detail, the white in the room allows it to, not feel heavy or cluttered. A large bay window on the south-facing wall brings in large amounts of light into the space, which is useful considering that this room had no electrical lights. The window also provides warmth. Baillie Scott designed most of his houses to make use of the south-facing sun, so all of the main family rooms would be on the south elevation, and this helped with the warmth, and because of the fact that this was a time when central heating wasn't really, or it was only just sort of taking hold. Baillie Scott introduces a shock of colour into the room through the tiles in this fireplace, which are a vivid blue glaze. Now, these tiles are of much interest for this talk, as it was always our belief that the tiles at Blackwell, in Blackwell's fireplaces, were made by William de Morgan. However, when Sarah visited Blackwell ahead of the Sublime Symmetry exhibition, she mentioned that it was almost unheard of for Baillie Scott to create, for William de Morgan to create plain tiles. And I'll leave it there for the moment, as I think it's going to make an interesting point of discussion at the end. But the blue is certainly very similar to the blue found within de Morgan's ceramics. Here are some close-up details from within the white drawing room. On the right is the detail of the fire dogs which are in the white drawing room, which are original to the house. The Holts sadly didn't stay long at Blackwell. Their eldest son died during the First World War, followed not long after by the death of the father, Edward, and the house fell into misuse. Eventually, it was requisitioned during the Second World War and became a place of refuge for the girls of Hoyton Ladies College in Liverpool, which at the time was suffering really severely in the Blitz. During the school years, many of Blackwell's fireplaces were blocked up, which is thankful because that's why we have so many of the original features and they still survive, including these fire dogs. They again feature enamelled rowan berries and daisies. To the left is a close-up detail of the gesso ceiling, which features a design of interlocking oak. Where we're lucky enough to have the original mould for the ceiling in the collection, it too was carved by Arthur Simpson, whose archives and many pieces of woodwork are in the Lakeland Arts collection. And finally, before leaving the white drawing room, I just wanted to share this amazing view, the light from which is what beckons you down the corridor. So if you imagine you're standing in that long corridor, this is right at the end of it. From this cosy nook, the family could look out over Windermere to the Coniston Fells, and it's through this vista that Baillie Scott really grounds the house within the Lakeland landscape, reminding us of this breathtaking area, even from within. From here, we head upstairs, where I briefly just wanted to show you the upstairs corridor and how it sort of reflects the corridor downstairs as well. It's low and dark and encourages exploration through these pops of light, which signal towards windows and bedrooms. A unique feature of Blackwell is that it has no banister rails on these stairs, which is a design choice that Baillie Scott made to maintain a sleek and smooth appearance to the corridors. But as a historic home, we're open to visitors all year round, and this actually creates a lot of difficulties for us, particularly with, for visitors who have mobility issues. Due to the Grade 1 listing of the building, we're not actually allowed to change this. The design is what's listed. However, a lift has been installed, and which provides access to some of the upper floors. Blackwell had 8 bedrooms originally, 2 of which are now open as display bedrooms, and the remainder of which make up our exhibition galleries. Some have also been converted into offices, predominantly in the attic floors. As I always used to say, is that that's where the help was then, where they're now, we're still the help. So this is the yellow bedroom. It's positioned above the white drawing room, and it takes in those same amazing views. Plate sample analysis undertaken during the renovation works at Blackwell by Lakeland Arts when we would open it up to the public shows that the room would have originally been painted this deep sunshine yellow, and so for the bedroom this colour has been reinstated. You can see that the upstairs rooms at Blackwell are much less ornate. The carved wood panelling gives way to lath and plaster walls. However, Baillie Scott maintains this interest through barrel ceilings, a feature that provides grandeur to what would otherwise be a fairly modest room. Another view of the room shows the bedroom's other key feature, a large fireplace with inset bookshelves. The tiles are also less ornate than downstairs. Baillie Scott opted for a plain white with blue detail tiles, which we can have a zoom in on now. And you may recognise this design for the tiles, as it's one of De Morgan's most famous. It's Bedford Park Daisy. So here the detail tiles are clearly De Morgan. However, again, Sarah mentioned it was really unusual for De Morgan to create plain tiles, so it's unclear as to whether the tile surrounding it would have also been De Morgan. Sarah also mentioned, if I remember correctly, that she said that she has only found one other example of white De Morgan tiles in the UK, so if they were potentially by De Morgan, they'd be incredibly rare. From here we move into the master bedroom, which again features another barrel ceiling. The furniture in this room is almost entirely by Baillie Scott, with the exception of the lamp that you can see, the standing lamp, which is from the Birmingham School of Arts, and the chest in front of the bed, which is by an unknown arts and crafts maker. In 1901, the same year that Blackwell was completed, Baillie Scott published 80 designs, not 800, for furniture in the Pittleworks, which was a mail order catalogue. Designed by Baillie Scott, the furniture would be made in Bedford by master craftsman J.P. White. Featured in the catalogue was a design for a bed, which you can see here. But interestingly, this bed is not from 1901. It was actually made in 2016. As I mentioned previously, none of the furniture that you see at Blackwell is indigenous to the house. Instead, the house features a selection of arts and crafts furniture from the Lakeland Arts collection. Now, double beds across all ages of antiques are quite hard to find, and arts and crafts beds particularly so. So in 2015, Lakeland Arts commissioned a furniture maker, David Leach, to recreate this bed to the exact specifications of Baillie Scott's catalogue. The bed is made of oak and features silver inlay. From the other side of the room, we can see another fireplace. This time it's flanked by stained glass windows, which feature a daffodil and bluebird design. For this room, Baillie Scott chose a colour scheme of red and yellow. Plain yellow lustre tiles are inset with ruby lustre glazed tiles of another De Morgan design. And here are those tiles up close. I was trying to find the exact design that this was, sort of searching through the De Morgan Foundation's collection online. It's very similar to the KL Rose tiles, but it's slightly different, maybe due to the fact that the KL Rose is predominantly produced in a tin glaze, whereas this is lustre, which provides sort of the clarity to those lines you can see. But I'd be very interested to hear Sarah's thoughts on sort of what the design of this tile is. And finally, I wanted to end our tour on one of what was another bedroom at Blackwell, but is now our temporary exhibition space. It's here where the beautifully curated Sublime Symmetry exhibition is currently on display. And I won't show too much, as I do hope you'll come and visit. But I wanted to end on the fireplace that's in this room. This is perhaps Baillie Scott's most daring use of colour throughout Blackwell, a shocking citrine yellow. The fireplace features plain lustre tiles, again inset with Bedford Park daisy, in that same kind of yellowy green colourway. Now, it's here that I think we may have just won Sarah over into thinking that our plain tiles, though very unusual, could in fact be by De Morgan. As you have hopefully seen throughout this tour, Baillie Scott was a passionate designer who believed in unity of design and paying attention to even the tiniest of details. Every ceiling rose, every window, even the cast iron latches on the windows, they all have a unique design born out of the almost infinite imagination of Baillie Scott. It's no doubt this approach that led Baillie Scott to William De Morgan to produce at least some of the tiles for this house, as the two shared a love of nature, of experimentation, and also that endless imagination. Whilst the provenance of the plain tiles at Blackwell are incredibly hard to prove, owing to the loss of Baillie Scott's archives, which were really sadly destroyed in fires twice, and also due to the fact that by the time Blackwell was being built, De Morgan & Co. was actually winding down their business. So there's no sort of archive or paper trail to prove that they could be. But it would be very out of character for someone like Baillie Scott to have purchased kind of off-the-shelf tiles, or to combine, these decorative De Morgan tiles with cheaper kind of replica glazes. After installing the Sublime Symmetry exhibition at Blackwell, we were able to see De Morgan ceramics next to the fireplace, which was really special, because it's the first time, you know, that De Morgan, we've displayed De Morgan ceramics in there in quite a long time. And I think Sarah said it's the first time that De Morgan ceramics have been displayed in a room with a De Morgan fireplace. And so we were able to kind of hold the ceramics up to the fireplace. And Sarah commented how that vivid kind of yellow was almost an exact match for some of the glazes within De Morgan ceramics. And this is really exciting for us as it gives maybe this slight little bit of credence to the idea that maybe they could be. And if they were, they would be incredibly rare. But yeah, I just thought it was a really kind of nice thing for us to end on. So thank you. And I hope you really enjoyed this tour of Blackwell and sort of finding out a bit more about Baillie Scott. If you haven't already visited the house, I would highly recommend it. And information about the Sublime Symmetry exhibition, how to book tickets, can be found on our website or also by scanning this QR code. The exhibition is on until the 6th of October this year, so it's a really long run and plenty of time to get up and see it. I'll stop sharing the screen.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Naomi. Thank you. What a wonderful way to look around the house and be guided through it by you. And I love the way that you did that for us, taking it room by room, almost as though we were there with you. And for me, it's the Rowan motif that keeps coming up, that I love, that idea of unity throughout all the rooms. But also having been to Blackwell recently and spent some time in the Lake District, I can attest to the fact it needs to be a hardy plant, I think you said, to grow in that area. With the weather that we had whilst we were installing the exhibition. I didn't manage to see the lake until about day 3, I don't think, despite it being right there out of the window due to the mist and the rain. So that's a very good choice by Baillie Scott indeed to represent the location that the house was in. If you do have any questions for Naomi, please do feel free to use the chat box to ask those, and I can read them out to her. And to get things going, I was going to sort of maybe follow up on the comment about the Rowan being kind of indigenous to the Lake District, and that's why it became such a key feature of Baillie Scott's designs, and just wondered how important that was to him as a designer, to always kind of situate his buildings and his designs in the landscape and the area he was designing for. And do we see that in any other of his projects, do you know?
Yeah, it was really important. He was someone, he wrote quite a lot about his own sort of ideas around design. So the Houses and Gardens, which I mentioned, the book that he published, is sort of a manifesto of his beliefs in design. He wrote about houses as they are and houses as they should be, which I think was one of the sort of main kind of chapter titles of the book. And he goes into this idea that particularly around that time, you're seeing more and more houses and sort of middle class people, you know, building houses, smaller houses that are still grand and doing it into their own kind of designs. And he's sort of saying, you know, they're not maybe necessarily taking into account the area, the sort of the historic buildings in the area, and they can stick out like a sore thumb. And I think that's something that's still relevant today. And this idea of, I think also the idea that if it's not broke, don't fix it, that sometimes there's actually, say, for instance, the designs that you see within Blackwell and how, you know, the rough cast render, the chimney pots, these are not just beautiful things, that they're structural and they're functional as well, which I think represents something in the arts and crafts movement, this idea of function and beauty sort of existing at the same time. The houses that he built on the Isle of Man were a really good sort of example of that. He built not just houses, but also public buildings. So he built sort of a police station and a church, a parish sort of church as well. And he was always very conscious, I think, of the historic houses that he was building things around, and just sort of making sure that the materials that he was using really reflected the areas that they were in.
Yeah, Blackwell feels very sympathetic to the landscape, doesn't it? It sort of blends in beautifully.
Yeah.
Banks of
You
Windermere.
see, if you ever go on a boat trip on Windermere, you can see Blackwell sort of on the hill. And even though it's obviously very grand, what I think is always really interesting is it doesn't it sticks out, but not in a obvious way, and that it sticks out from everything else that's around it. So there's sort of farmhouses that are surrounding it that are from the 1700s, but it has that kind of shared language with it.
Yeah, a real success. We've got a question from Sue. Thank you, Sue. First of all, she says absolutely fantastic talk. Thank you very much, Naomi. Could you give us the name of the catalogue in which Baillie Scott's furniture was advertised? And she's looking forward to coming and visiting again.
Yes, so it's the Pittle Works. I'm trying to remember now how it's spelled because it's not spelled how you need to say it. I can type it into them. I'm trying to get it up on my notes now. I'm one of those people that I'm terrible at spelling things out loud. Sorry, I've lost all my notes. So the Pittle Works, so it's spelled Pyghle. It's like Pytle.
Thank you for spelling that out, because I don't think any of us would have guessed that. I certainly
That was like when I first came to Blackwell and I was like trying to pronounce it and I was like, how is this even said?
what are these letters?
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you for clarifying. And yeah, it sounds like a great thing to go and look up. Anybody got any more questions for Naomi about Blackwell or Baillie Scott? And I think just a comment, obviously you mentioned my visit and sort of the joy of being able to look at some of the fireplaces that we had there. Just to say that the other example of plain white De Morgan tiles are at Standon. And I think I'm right in saying that that is verified that they were bought from De Morgan. So that's Standon House in East Grinstead, which is now owned by the National Trust. So if anyone's feeling really energetic and up to a full cross-country examination of De Morgan tiles and wanted to get down to Standon and see those and then come up to the Lake District and see Blackwell's plain tiles, it would be interesting to know anyone's thoughts on that. And then with the blue tiles downstairs in the white drawing room, there are examples of the plain blue tiles at Leighton House Museum, who I'm sure lots of people on this call will know. But they were bigger. That was the difference there, wasn't it? That Leighton House had the 6-inch plain blue turquoise tiles, and whereas they're 3-inch tiles at Blackwell in the blue drawing room. So I think, the chances are that they probably are De Morgan, given sort of all the research you've presented here and the facts you're saying about Baillie Scott and how meticulous he was, and everything was done with such care that, like you say, why on earth buy the artisan tiles just for 5 decorative pieces in a scheme? You'd ask the designer of those tiles to put together a whole fireplace to your specification to fit your design ideas. So after coming to see them, I think I am convinced that we we go forward and call them De Morgan unless we're corrected again, somebody in the future.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like I said, so Baillie Scott's archives were destroyed, I think for the first time just in a fire, and then second time in the Blitz. So it's just really unfortunate. So we don't actually have any, apart from the Simpsons of Kendal, who we happen to have the archives of anyway at Lakeland Arts. So that's how we know that they worked on the woodwork and the carving. We don't actually know who worked on. We know that Baillie Scott, from his own writings, was really passionate about using local makers and builders, because even though he was a designer, he wasn't a maker, so he didn't know how to do any of these things himself, which I think is quite interesting. So he was very passionate about working with local artisans, but we don't know who did the stonework. We don't know who. Yeah, and so for instance, the tiles, like we know that some of them are by De Morgan because they clearly are, the design tiles. And Diane Haig, who unfortunately passed away last year, she was the kind of specialist in Baillie Scott, and she has helped us out a lot in sort of suggesting that this could be by this person or that person. Also what is interesting is I'm trying to remember the name of the house now. It's gone from my brain under the pressure, but there's a Voisey house across the water that was being built around the same time as Blackwell, and there's sort of this theory. I think there was a note somewhere that Diane had found that had suggested that perhaps the builders and the makers that were working on that house would do a bit in the morning there, and then would Broadleys, that's the name of the house, and then perhaps they would come to Blackwell in the afternoon and do a bit there, as builders do today. So that's a clue potentially. But yeah, it's really frustrating to kind of not know exactly where kind of the materials came from, or who worked on them.
Yeah, and that ability to celebrate the local artisans from the period in the area that were kind of being enlisted to put the house together.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Naomi. Like I said, what a wonderful way to take us around the house. I really appreciate the way that you laid that talk out. I thought it was fantastic. And of course, ending on the crescendo of please go and visit, especially before the 6th of October, whilst the De Morgan exhibition is on, and see those beautiful ceramics in that just fantastic setting. Before you all came on the call, Naomi and I were saying just how fantastic it feels to have the ceramics at Blackwell. They feel very at home, even as we were getting them out of boxes. So it is worth making the trip up to see. Thank you everybody for watching today, whether that's live with us now or whether you're watching the recording later on YouTube. We really appreciate it. And do have a look at the De Morgan Foundation website, which is www.demorgan.org.uk, to have a look at more of the online events that we do in our programme. Thank you very much. And thanks again, Naomi. Bye-bye.
Bye.